Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. The desire to get what one wants at any cost often drives people to terrifying acts and shocking betrayals. But sometimes it's hard to even imagine what someone is capable of in pursuit of their most cherished dream, when another person's life becomes nothing more than collateral damage. But our story today won't be about an ordinary murder. The tragic story of a young schoolteacher stunned all of Brazil, but no place felt the horror more deeply than the quiet town of São João Batista. For this small community, the crime marked perhaps the most brutal, disturbing, and unprecedented event in its entire history. Flávia Godinho, Lader Mafra, was born on April 19, 1996, in the quiet town of São João Batista, located in the municipality of Canelinha, in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina. She was the youngest in a large and close-knit family. Her parents were humble, working-class people who did their best to provide for their sons and daughters, raising them with love and care. Flávia grew up kind-hearted, responsive, and sociable. She was a strong student, had a love for music, and was always surrounded by friends. Even as a teenager, she knew she wanted to become a teacher and never intended to leave her small hometown. She enrolled at a local teacher training college, and after graduation, she began working as an elementary school educator, ironically, at the same school she once attended herself. At the age of 20, Flávia met a young man named Valdeli Mafra. They quickly formed a romantic connection and began dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdeli proposed, and Flávia gladly accepted. That October, the couple married, and just 2 months later, they received life-changing news. They were expecting. The joy they felt was indescribable. Rosalba Maria Grimm, later known by her married name Chistel, was also born in the same provincial town of São João Batista in 1994. There is little publicly known about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was considered a bit odd and overly intense. People around her often said she exaggerated stories, made up accomplishments, and tried to make herself seem more important, which led many to not take her seriously. As she got older, Rosalba increasingly sought attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would invent stories about personal hardships and serious health conditions she claimed to be battling. In one particularly alarming episode, she tried to keep a boyfriend from leaving her by telling him she had a late-stage illness and begged him to stay with her during what she claimed were her final months. When the act went on too long, she suddenly announced she had experienced a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rosalba married a quiet and shy man named Zulmiar Chistel. He was easygoing and seemed to go along with everything she said. It was Rosalba who pushed for the marriage, and he simply agreed. The couple settled into a small home in a calm residential area on the outskirts of town. Rosalba worked as a librarian at a local school, though her co-workers were split in their opinions of her, largely due to her overbearing behavior and reputation for dishonesty. For the first 3 years of marriage, Rosalba was unable to become pregnant. Medical professionals even suggested she might never be able to. So when she unexpectedly discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was expecting, she was overjoyed. She immediately shared the news with family, friends, and co-workers, overwhelmed with happiness. Rosalba even went as far as posting a photo of a positive pregnancy test on her social media, sharing the news with everyone she knew. Over the following weeks, she received an outpouring of congratulations and kind messages, all wishing the best for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like royalty, protecting her from any stress, handling everything for her. Even co-workers who had never really warmed up to her before now seemed to soften, knowing how long she had dreamed of becoming a mother. But in December of that same year, something devastating happened. While in her 3rd month, Rosalba experienced a miscarriage. She was stunned by the loss, but she told no one. Instead, she continued to pretend that the pregnancy was ongoing. It's hard to say what Rosalba was planning at that point, but she clearly decided to go all in. Knowing there was little chance she could conceive again, She started wearing loose-fitting clothing and eating more to appear as if she were still expecting, and somewhere in the background, a deeply disturbing plan began to take shape. About 2 months after Rosalba lost the pregnancy, news started to circulate at the school about another pregnancy, that of a young teacher named Flavia, who was being showered with congratulations. Until then, the two women hadn't been close. They barely exchanged greetings. But now, Rosalba suddenly took a keen interest in becoming friends with Flavia Godinho. She added Flavia on social media and began messaging her daily, offering to go for walks or simply chat. Since their supposed due dates were similar, Rosalba claimed, they would have plenty in common. Flavia, though hesitant at first, aware of Rosalba's reputation as someone a bit eccentric, eventually agreed to have lunch with her during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosalba, in her typical dramatic fashion, told a number of fabricated stories to draw sympathy. The only truth in her tales was that she had struggled for years to get pregnant, and that this pregnancy was something she had longed for. She made no mention of the miscarriage. At first, their meetings were infrequent, even though they saw each other at work almost every day. But as it would later be discovered, Rosalba had also connected with 2 other expecting women from the same town via social media, women who were believed to be around the same stage in their pregnancies as Rosalba had claimed to be. She also tried to build friendships with them, inviting them out or even asking to visit their homes. Rosalba told everyone she was expecting a daughter and had already chosen a name, Alyssa. But once she found out that both of the women she met online were having boys, she abruptly stopped contacting them. Around the same time, she learned that Flavia was expecting a girl, and from that moment, Rosalba became completely fixated on her. As time passed, it became increasingly difficult for Rosalba to keep up the illusion of being pregnant. She was constantly searching the internet for symptoms and experiences typically reported by expectant mothers, repeating them to her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over the course of several months, she managed to gain nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully match that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. To make matters worse, her husband kept insisting on accompanying her to doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound screen. But Rosalba had to get creative to keep up the lie. Zulmiar was a simple and trusting man. He loved his wife deeply and believed everything she told him. So it wasn't hard for her to keep him in the dark. She would tell him that appointments had been canceled or rescheduled because the clinic was overbooked, the doctor was out of town, or had called in sick. Other times, she'd claim she got lucky and was squeezed in for a last-minute visit while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To make her story even more convincing, Rosalba started writing fake notes on her phone, supposedly from the doctor, recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. She wasn't well versed in medical terminology, often making spelling and factual mistakes, but Zulmiar never noticed. Medical stuff wasn't his strong suit, so he didn't question a thing. In an effort to avoid suspicion and keep the deception going, Rosalba even texted her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she claimed that the couple should temporarily pause their intimate relationship to avoid any possible risks to the pregnancy. He followed the advice, fully convinced it was coming from a medical professional. Rosalba became obsessed with shopping for baby items, onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She often visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but over time her focus shifted completely to Flavia. In July 2020, Rosalba staged an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the pictures, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie. Her husband stood beside her, lovingly embracing and kissing her belly while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything looked so natural that no one suspected a thing. Later, those photos would become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flavia and Rosalba had become nearly inseparable. They spent time together daily, talking, sharing thoughts, and making plans for the future. But it was always Rosalba who initiated everything. Flavia, kind and empathetic by nature, couldn't bring herself to say no. If she ever tried to reschedule, Rosalba would resort to her usual tactic, playing on sympathy, saying she was dealing with personal issues and needed someone to talk to. It always worked. In reality, Rosalba was closely observing Flavia, asking questions about her symptoms, her doctor's visits, the tests she was undergoing. She would then repeat those details to her own family and husband, as if they were her own experiences. Rosalba copied Flavia's walk and mannerisms, mimicked her food cravings, and even imitated the way she held her back or moved around clumsily. Valdelli didn't like his wife's new friend. He was upset that the two of them were spending so much time together, and it caused tension in the marriage. They even argued about it more than once. But Flavia, with her gentle and compassionate nature, couldn't bring herself to turn Rosalba away or ignore her. By mid-July, Rosalba should have already delivered, based on what she had told people. But she came up with another lie, saying that the doctors had made a mistake calculating the due date. Behind the scenes, she was preparing something truly horrifying, something straight out of a nightmare horror film that, tragically, would soon become a reality. In August, Rosalba began organizing a celebration for Flavia in honor of her upcoming delivery. She was picking out decorations, inviting guests, and planning a special photo area. Flavia, trying to be polite, initially tried to decline the event, but Rosalba took it personally, putting on a show of tears, saying how much effort she was putting in and how badly she wanted to give Flavia a meaningful gift. Eventually, Flavia agreed, never suspecting what lay ahead. The event was set for August 28, 2020. Rosalba was handling all the arrangements and promised to send everyone the location and final details. But the day before, she called each invited guest and told them the event had to be postponed due to some last-minute issues. She said she'd follow up with a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing. No one questioned it, and no one reached out to Flavia, who remained completely unaware. On August 28th, right at the originally planned time, Rosalba picked up her unsuspecting target, telling her they were heading to the baby shower. Since it was meant to be a women-only gathering, Valdelli stayed home. He simply walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rosalba's car, completely unaware that it would be the last time he'd see her. As they drove, Flavia had no idea where they were going. Rosalba said it was supposed to be a surprise. A few minutes into the trip, she suggested Flavia put on a blindfold to preserve the surprise. Flavia hesitated, but eventually agreed, sensing no danger. During the rest of the drive, Rosalba kept the conversation light, chatting casually to keep Flavia at ease and prevent her from suspecting anything. She drove them to the outskirts of town, to an abandoned pottery plant and empty ceramic warehouse. Still blindfolded, Flavia was helped out of the car by Rosalba, who carefully led her into one of the old buildings. The silence and an odd smell must have alarmed Flavia. She reached up to remove the blindfold, but didn't get the chance. Suddenly, a heavy piece of brick came crashing down on her head. Rosalba struck again, and again. Flavia collapsed to the floor. Then, in a final act of aggression, Rosalba delivered another blow directly to her face. She later couldn't explain why. Flavia was already unconscious. It seemed she simply wanted to inflict as much damage as possible on the woman she had once called a friend. Without even confirming whether Flavia was still alive, Rosalba rushed into the second phase of her horrific and unimaginable plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began cutting into her friend. Rosalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no clue about how a procedure like a C-section is actually performed. She simply started slicing into Flavia's abdomen with a utility blade, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted with extreme aggression, using far too much force and no precision. A box cutter is no surgical instrument. It tore through skin rather than making clean cuts. Rosalba had completely misjudged the reality of what she was attempting to do. What she imagined would be quick and clean turned out to be shockingly chaotic and messy. The act took much longer than she had anticipated. She grew increasingly frustrated and careless, accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The conditions were completely unsanitary. Rosalba hadn't even attempted to clean the tools she brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal at all was nothing short of miraculous. After finally removing the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her on the back seat of her car. Rosalba then wiped her hands as best she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused for a moment to rehearse her story, then headed to the hospital. In her rush, Rosalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car. While waiting at a red light, the lid popped open just enough to reveal bloodied clothing. The passengers in the car behind her noticed and immediately called law enforcement, giving a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Just minutes after Rosalba pulled up to the hospital, officers arrived. They intercepted her as she approached the entrance, carrying a blood-covered bundle in her arms. Rosalba told them that it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical care. She was escorted to the emergency room, while the officers waited nearby. With a shaky voice and tears in her eyes, Rosalba told the medical staff she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to make it to the hospital. She claimed the baby had fallen onto gravel during the rush to her car, and in a panic, she had wrapped her in the first blanket she could find before driving over. When one of the doctors said she would need to be examined, Rosalba refused, insisting she was fine. Her behavior raised immediate red flags. After examining the baby, the medical team became convinced something was terribly wrong, and that Rosalba might be hiding a violent act. Several odd cuts and puncture wounds were found on the baby's body, injuries that clearly didn't match a fall onto gravel. The wounds appeared to have been made with a sharp object in a random, disorganized pattern. Thankfully, none of the injuries had damaged vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated and dressed them to prevent infection. Medical staff immediately voiced their concerns to the police, and together, they insisted that the woman claiming to be the mother undergo a physical examination. They made it clear that if she refused, they would have no choice but to proceed using legal authority. Faced with no other option, Rosalba reluctantly agreed. As suspected, the examination revealed no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, no indicators at all. Internally and externally, everything appeared normal. Her entire story was a fabrication from beginning to end. Still, the doctors didn't confront her right away. Instead, they calmly asked Rosalba to call her husband and have him bring her personal documents, since she only had her driver's license on hand. At this point, they needed to carefully figure out where the baby came from and why the newborn had those strange wounds. Judging by the condition of the baby, she appeared to have been delivered in an unsanitary environment. But no one yet realized the extent of the horrific crime that had been committed. Rosalba called Zulmiyar, telling him she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, though there had been complications. She asked him to bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. But she made a critical mistake. She forgot about a key piece of evidence. While collecting the documents, Zulmiyar unknowingly grabbed a medical record that didn't belong to his wife. It was Flavia's file, one that Rosalba had stolen weeks earlier when she tagged along to a doctor's appointment, pretending to be there for support. She had taken the folder to read through the test results and recommendations, and afterward had stuffed it into the drawer with her own documents, right where Zulmiyar found it. As soon as hospital staff saw that the medical file belonged to someone named Godinho, a woman expected to give birth to a daughter in early September, they realized who the baby truly belonged to. But the most terrifying question remained: where was the real mother? The police immediately suspected Zulmiyar might have been involved. He was detained and questioned about how he got hold of someone else's medical file, and where exactly his wife had gotten the baby. Confused and clearly shaken, he said he had no idea what was going on. When they told him Rosalba had never been pregnant, he froze. Then he began insisting it wasn't true. He claimed he had cared for Rosalba throughout her entire pregnancy, even saying he had felt the baby move. He showed photos from their maternity shoot, and even messages that he thought were sent by the doctor who had been following her pregnancy. But those texts became additional evidence. They were full of spelling mistakes and incorrect medical terms. Authorities quickly confirmed the messages had been sent from Rosalba's own phone. When all the facts were laid out, Zulmiyar broke down, covering his face with his hands and crying. He had genuinely believed his wife. He had been looking forward to becoming a father. Meanwhile, Valdeli Mafra, Flavia's husband, had reported her missing. He told police that she had left with her friend to attend a baby shower and was expected home by 9 p.m., but she never returned. Her phone was turned off. Concerned, Valdeli began calling others who were supposedly invited to the party. To his horror, He discovered that the event had actually been canceled the day before. When Valdelli couldn't reach Rosalba, the friend who had supposedly organized the party, he grew more concerned. Her phone, too, was turned off. Not wanting to waste any more time, Valdelli went straight to the police. At that point, law enforcement hadn't yet received the hospital report about Rosalba and the newborn, so they didn't realize the cases might be connected. The officers said they would begin searching in the morning, but that wasn't good enough for Valdelli. He joined forces with Flavia's parents and other relatives, and they began their own search. They split into teams to cover more ground. Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was Valdelli himself who, while passing an abandoned factory, chose to stop and take a look. That's when he found his wife's body, horribly disfigured. Stunned and terrified, he immediately called the police and emergency services. He couldn't fathom what had happened or who could be capable of such a brutal act. By the time police arrived at the scene, they had already received word from the hospital about a woman who had come in with a newborn she claimed to have delivered, but doctors had confirmed she hadn't given birth at all. Not only that, but she somehow had a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. When authorities realized the name of the victim found at the abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, the case became crystal clear. Forensics determined that the victim had been struck at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but none of those injuries alone had been fatal. The cause of death was massive blood loss caused by the violent attempt to remove the baby. The tool used, a box cutter, was found right next to the body. With all the evidence in place, proving Rosalba's guilt was a matter of procedure. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rosalba had tried to claim as her own was indeed the daughter of Flavia. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Rosalba continued to deny everything and stuck to her story, even as the facts stacked up against her. Her fingerprints were found on the blade next to the body. Blood from the victim was found on her clothing, shoes, and even in her hair. Investigators were also able to confirm that Rosalba had suffered a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had chosen her victim in advance and carefully planned the entire crime for the purpose of taking the baby, but gave little thought to what would come next. Rosalba was found guilty of aggravated homicide, assault resulting in injury to a minor, and kidnapping. In an effort to receive a lighter sentence, she eventually described the events in vivid detail, leaving everyone in the courtroom stunned. Her attorney attempted to argue that she had experienced a psychological breakdown following the miscarriage and had become so obsessed with the idea of becoming a mother that she lost touch with reality. But a psychological evaluation concluded that Rosalba was mentally competent and fully responsible for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving at least half of her sentence. Zulmiyar Shistel, her husband, was completely cleared of any involvement. It was proven that he had no idea what his wife had planned and had played no role in the crime. He filed for divorce soon after the arrest and moved out of São João Batista. As for Flavia's family, after the legal proceedings were complete, they too decided to leave the small town, where everyone knows everyone. The tragedy had become the most talked about case in the area, and they didn't want young Cecilia, the name they gave Flavia's daughter, to grow up in a place haunted by her mother's story. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.